All right, hello again. This is Jeff Scott at Blackhawk Technical College. I'll be coming at you right now with Chapter 4 of our Swift book. Chapter 4 is More User Interface Fun. And what I'm going to do this time, unlike the last lecture, is I'm not going to bring up the PDF. I've got the PDF actually playing. I've got an Intel machine to the side of me. But I'm just going to literally start with the project. So they do mention in the book, though, that in Chapter 3 they started to discuss Model View Controller, and we built an app with it. All right, in this chapter we're going to build another app, and it's again going to have a lot of different controls in it, some of which we have not talked about before, and some of which you may never have seen before. We're going to talk about a segmented control, some switches, and some other stuff. Okay? So the author says because this chapter's app uses so many different user interface items, we're going to work a little differently than we did in the previous two chapters. We'll break the app into pieces and implement them one piece at a time, bouncing back and forth between Xcode and the simulator, and I will do the same. This chapter is about the same size as the last chapter, I guess, maybe a little longer. So I'm going to break it up into at least two different tapes. Now, I think I've got an actual working copy of this. Again, I'm going to build it, but I think I've got an actual working copy of it. So this is Chapter 4. I think it's Control Fun, I think. But I want to bring it up. We're still going to build it, but I want to bring it up and run it for you and show you at least what this is going to look like, or what it's supposed to look like when we get all done. All right, a little bit different, like I said. Some of the stuff is the same and some is different. There's a few things that are going to be a little bit different in here, though. All right, so I'm just running it. I'm not going to do anything with the app other than run it right now and show you what's in here. Ideally, at least, so we run this, it should look the same as what's in your book on page 88, figure 4.1, and you'll see that there are text fields in it, labels, a slider, and other iPhone controls. You hear any noise in the background? I'm at home right now. Try to get it as quiet as I can, but do the best I can with what I've got. So after I show this to you, I'm just going to stop the I'm literally just going to stop the simulator, and I'm going to close the project and then rebuild it. Again, that's all I plan on doing. I'm going to go over chapters 4 and 5 ideally this week, and 6 and 7 next week, and I'm just going to keep taping. So here we see it, Control Fun, and you'll notice when it comes up that it's going to be a yellow background, and there'll be an image view with A-press around where you have Control Fun right now. So let's see. Why I always have such troubles with this. There we go. All right, so there's our image view. You notice you've got a couple labels, a couple text boxes. Here's a slider, and we can tell, as always, where it is. This is a switch, and notice right now it says switches and it says buttons. So switches is what's highlighted now. Notice when I go to button, the switches are basically overridden by the button, and if I click on the button, it says do something. All right, I thought it was going to do. I thought it literally did do something. But if I go back to switches again, all right, those are things I can turn on and off, etc. Okay, so we'll see those. Like I said, that button was supposed to literally do something. It's turned the screen a different color, but not really much of anything else. So And here, so as we go through this, all right, there we go. Okay, so we've got that. If we want to go and type something in, you know, go to number, and the keyboard changes to a numeric keypad, etc. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to close the simulator. I'm going to close the project. Again, you have all these projects already completed also. So what you saw there, again, at the top was an image view, and all that does is display a static image. Then we saw 2 labels and 2 text fields followed by a slider, and below the slider was a segment and control which had 2 switches. So we're going to go through all that stuff in the chapter here. What was supposed to happen when we press the do something button, what was supposed to happen, as mentioned on page 90 in the book, it should have come up and it should have created what's called an action sheet. We're going to go into that in the chapter 2. All right. And depending on what you pressed with the action sheet, it should have brought up an alert. So again, we'll go through all that stuff in the chapter. So that brings me up to page 91, where the author discusses, in fact, maybe I should. I didn't really want to bring that up, but I'll bring this up anyway. Just kind of tough bouncing back and forth between these two, so. So again, we're in chapter 4. All right, and as mentioned to you already, if we look here on page 88, that's what the app is going to look like. You already saw that. All right, again, static image view control, static labels, active text boxes, active seek bar slider, active switches. So when I click here, the switches show. When I click here, that becomes a big button. I think they're going to show that on here. There, it's a button. And although it didn't seem to work, when you click do something, it should have come up with this, and I didn't see that on the screen. All right, and again, this is page 90 in the book. And as mentioned here, it says our app uses an action sheet, which is what this is, to solicit a response from the user. So you can say, yes, I'm sure, or no way. And then again, depending on what you choose, it's going to bring up an alert like this. Okay, so we're going to do all that stuff as we go on in here. Again, as shown here on page 91 in the book, it says interface controls are used in 3 modes: active, static, and passive. Okay, it says the buttons we used in the previous chapter were examples of active controls. Technically, an active control is one that at least conceivably you could go and you could add some kind of function or some kind of a method to make it do something. All right. Now it says, although many controls you will use will directly trigger action methods, not all will. I mean, the image view is a good example in here. It's totally passive. Its sole job is to just show the picture of the A-Press logo. All right. And as mentioned, some controls can work in a passive mode. They don't trigger action methods. A classic example is a text field on a page. Remember, the text field is really and truly like a text box that we've used in other languages, in that it can either hold input or it can hold output. All right. Now, they mention here on an iOS device, most of the available controls can be used in any and all of the 3 modes. All right. All iOS controls are subclasses of UI control. Okay, then they go through some difference between controls in iOS and controls on the Mac. It's not my intention to go through that stuff. I don't really see where that's going to help us, to be honest with you. All right. As mentioned here in the box down towards the bottom of the page in this note, it says, although controls can trigger multiple methods in iOS, the vast majority of the time you're probably better off implementing a single action method that does what you need to do for a particular control. And again, if that doesn't make a lot of sense, basically what they're just saying is, again, if you're going to click a button, you'll typically want it. You'll want to create a method to make it do something. Okay, that kind of thing. All right, so it's about time to create the application. So for right now, at least, I'm going to take this and minimize it and start up Xcode. All right, so I'll create a new Xcode project. And I don't remember what this one was called, so I'm just going to call it more. How about more? The chapter is called More User Interface Fun, so we'll just call it More User Interface Fun. All right, Blackhawk, we've got our organization, we've got our identifier. Swift is language, we'll keep it at iPhone. We're not going to get to core data for a while yet, so next. And I'll save this right to the desktop. And create. All right, the first thing that we're told to do here, I'm just going to bring up the storyboard when I can. When we bring up the storyboard, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in an image view. All right, now, again, they mention this in the book, but I want to show it to you because it is a little bit different. You'll notice it says here an image view displays a single image or an animation described by an array of images. When you put an image view in here, by default, it wants to take up the entire screen, as you can see here. All right. Now, we don't want it to take up that much, so you can take it and you can cut it down. Now, I'm coming over here into the document outline and I'm clicking on that, so I'm able to go drag on it and bring it up. All right. And I'm not sure if that's the right size or not. I'm not really that concerned with it right now. All right, in fact, let me back up on the other machine that I'm on here. It looks like it'll work, okay? All right, the key thing that you want to put into an image view, as you probably guess, would be an image. All right, right now there's nothing there and there's nothing showing there, so I'm going to go over to my assets folder right here. Okay, and what I'm going to want to do is open up Finder, and don't want that open. I'm going to go in here and find my Chapter 4. And in Chapter 4, there was not only the control fun, but there was also these button images that are in here that we're going to use, I think that we'll use later. So I'll start by highlighting both of those, and probably I could just take the folder and copy it in, but I'm going to take this, drag it over here, drag it right in there underneath my assets folder. And when it does that, if you haven't seen this before, it says, what do you want to do? Always choose copy here. We don't want to move them. We want to copy them, so I'll click finish. So those are in there now. I'm going to come and bring it up again, bring Finder up one more time. And that's, let's see, I think logos is where it was. Okay, so I'm going to grab these three here, right here, and do the same thing. So I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to stick them right in my assets folder. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Well, I don't know what I did. Okay, so let me try that again. Now I think I can at least minimize that. Again, copy items. Okay, so I've got all that stuff in there. Okay? All right, so on page 93 of the book, the author says, now that you've created your project, let's get the image we'll use in our image view. the image must be imported into Xcode before it'll be available for use inside of Interface Builder, so that's what we're going to do right now. It says you'll find 3 files in the 04 logos folder. Those are the last 3 I just brought in, those being apress_logo.ping, apress_logo at 2x.ping, and apress_logo at 3x.ping. The first one, okay, the first file, the apress_logo.ping, that one is the standard image file, and the other 2 are Retina versions of the same image. The author says we're going to add all 3 of these to the new project's image resource catalog and let the app decide which one to use at runtime. All right, so it says in Xcode, you want to click on the plus sign. It says select images right there. All right, so select that. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, I don't remember which one it is, if it's this one or this one. All right, so we selected images dot, it's XC assets, but it's usually just called the assets folder. And then in the plus sign that you see down here, the second one, not the leftmost one, but the one that's below where it says icon, way down at the bottom, I'm going to click that plus sign. And the author says we want to choose new image set, which is the top option. And I've done that. All right, notice now we've got a 1x, 2x, and 3x here. It says now add the images themselves to that item by dragging each one. So drag the first one, the Apress logo, drag that into the 1x, and grab the 2x and put it into the 2x, as you'd probably guess, and grab the 3x, and as you'd guess, put it in the 3x. Okay, so we've done all that. With the image added to your project, the next step is to implement the different interface elements. Okay, so we put that in, but we haven't, when they say we have to put in the interface elements, the first 5 that we have to put in, we want to basically get our app to look now as what's shown on page 93 here. All right, so that's going to be our image view, label, text field, label, text field. So that's what we're going to put in. So the author tells you, I've already done it, but the author says in the project navigator, so let's go back into Xcode and let's go back into our main storyboard. All right, so the author says click the storyboard to open the file and interface builder. You'll see the familiar white background. Yes, yeah, we know all that stuff. And I found the image view by typing image into the search field. And I drag the image view onto the storyboard. Again, as mentioned on the bottom of page 94 in the book, when we did that, the image view, once you drag it out of the library, it changes size twice, really. As you drag it out of the library pane, it's got the shape of a horizontal rectangle, but when you put it into the frame of your view, it expands to take up basically as much as it can. All right, and they mention on the bottom of page 94 that in many cases that's exactly what you want, because the first image you place in a view is often a background image. Okay, well, the author says here, don't worry, go ahead and resize it, but don't worry about getting it to be the exact size. It's not that big a thing. So it does look like what we want to do here is what's shown on page 95, and that is make this a little smaller than it currently is. But again, as the author has mentioned already, he said don't worry if it's not the exact right size. Okay, and I think it's actually way too wide the way it is, so I'm going to narrow it out a little bit. And I may make it too narrow or not narrow enough, but either way, that's not that big a thing. And we're supposed to bring it down just a tad here. There we go. All right, now it pretty much looks the way that you see in your book on page 95. So there it is in the book. Doesn't really resonate very well here. Looks a little better on here, I think. All right. And the author says if you have any problems directly manipulating this, then what you do is you go over. Remember, if I click the button way down here, okay, and I click the one that's over here, that brings up my document outline. So if I have a hard time clicking this, and sometimes you do, then just click in here and that'll highlight it. Remember, if I click here, the whole thing turns blue because I've highlighted everything. Okay. All right, so the author says, with the image view selected, bring up the Objects Attribute Inspector. All right, and if we look here, there's our File Inspector, there's our Quick Help Inspector, there's our Identity Inspector, there's our Attributes Inspector, our Size Inspector, and our Connections. So we want the Attributes Inspector right here. The most important setting in our image view is the topmost item, or the one that actually says image. Okay, so we want to do that. We want to select the A-Press logo. So there it is. Okay. Now, the author mentions here down on the bottom of page 96, it says, as it turns out, the image we use is a fair amount smaller than the image view in which it's placed. If you take a look at this, this has been stretched and it's been scaled to completely fill the image view. All right, and it says a big clue to this is if you go down to the mode setting, it's set to scale to fill, that you can see right here. It says, though we could keep our app that way, what you're actually doing by keeping your app that way is you're letting the system do more work than it has to do. So the author says, let's go and resize the image. All right, so indeed that doesn't have to happen. It says make sure the image view is selected, and it is. So you can see the resize handles. It says now select the image view one more time. All right, you should see the outline of the image replaced by a thick gray border. All right, and if we do that, and if we now go to editor and we set the mode, I guess we've got to go to editor. So we want to do size to fit content, which I don't see. I've got a feeling that I've got this selected, but I don't have selected what I actually want to have selected here. That's what I want, a size to fit content, but it's not letting me do that. Huh. See, I don't want to actually select the logo. All right, I want to actually select the image view. I thought that I was, but when I go over here to editor, it does not let me do a size to fit content. But when I click here, I don't see the, I guess those are resize handles. That's what he says. It says the outline is replaced by a thick gray border. I wouldn't call that a thick gray border, although I would call that a gray border. It says finally press Command equals. all right, or select Edit or Fit to Content. It says if it does not work, reselect the image view, drag it a little way to the side, and try it again. See, the problem I have is no matter what I'm doing now, it's selecting the actual logo. All right, it's not selecting the image view, and it's not showing in here. I'm going to try it one more time. I'm just going to delete this. Okay, I'm going to come back in here. I've got image view. I know kind of what I'm doing now. Although with me, sometimes it's hard to tell. Okay, there's image view. The image, a press logo. But again, as soon as I do that, I'm not able to actually look at my, my image view. So I'm gonna have to try to fix that, but I don't know exactly how right now. This is one of those times I wish I was lecturing in class because somebody would figure it out and let me know. So let's just leave it like that for now. Okay? Now they do mention on page 98 that dragging and resizing views in Interface Builder can be tricky. It says don't forget about the document outline. Okay, well I did that, but I still had a problem. But I'm going to try, they mention here you might also want to try Editor, Canvas, Show Bounds, Rectangles. It already is set, that's what I figured it was. All right, like I said, there has to be a way to fix that, make it a little bit better than it looks right now, but we'll figure it out. Okay? All right. Select the image view and then switch your attention back to the Attributes Inspector, which is where I am. Below the image view is the View section. As you may have deduced, the pattern here is that the attributes are specific to the selected object as shown at the top. Okay? So the first thing they mention here that we have is the mode, which defines how the view will display its content. It says feel free to play with it, but the default of scale to fill will work fine for now because we made the image view exactly the right size for its image. Well, we didn't, but I wanted to. All right. It says keep in mind that choosing any option that causes the image to scale will potentially add processing overhead at runtime. So it's best to try to avoid these. Okay. The next item they mentioned in here, this is an interesting item. And even if you have had, and I guess most of you have had either VB.NET or C# with me, but one of the things that .NET makes available to you that is available to you here also is a field that's called tag. All right, it says all in here, all subclasses of UI view, including all views you create and all controls you create, have a property called tag. It's a number, literally. All right, as it says, it's designed for your use. The system never sets its value, never changes its value. If you assign a tag value to a control or a view, you can be sure that it'll always have that value. So sometimes it's a lot easier to figure out what you want by giving it a number as opposed to having to remember the name of a control or whatever. So they mention tags provide an easy language independent way of identifying objects in your interface. All right. All right. There's two checkboxes here in what they call their interaction section. All right. And it says the first one, user interaction enabled, specifies whether the user can do anything at all with the object. It's almost always going to be checked, because if not, you're not able to do anything with it. And the second one that's in here, you just notice that when I put my mouse here, I do get some help. Sooner or later, something will pop up. And the other one is multiple touch. And as it says, it determines whether the control is capable of receiving multi-touch events or not, which is something that's discussed a lot later in the chapter. After that comes alpha. Remember that the alpha is how transparent or how opaque the image is going to be. 0 meaning totally transparent, 1 meaning totally opaque, and you can put it between any one. Again, this will take up extra cycle times on the computer, so unless you've got a compelling reason to do so, you probably shouldn't change it. After that comes background, which determines the background color for the view. All right. It says for image views, this matters only when the image doesn't fill its entire view size, so in this case, we're just going to leave it alone. After that comes tint, which lets you specify a tint color for the selected view. It's a color that some views use when it draws themselves. We'll talk about it later in the chapter when we get to the segment and control. All right, but the UI image view doesn't do anything with it, so we'll just hold off on that. Then we've got some more checkboxes. The first one is labeled opaque, which should be checked by default. It tells iOS that nothing behind the view needs to be drawn, and it'll let iOS's drawing methods do optimizations, again, to speed this whole process up. After that comes hidden, and it does exactly what, as it says, as you think it would do. So if you check the hidden, literally, it won't show when you run the program. Okay? And hiding an item can be useful, as they mention, at times. All right, again, it depends on what you're doing in the context in which you're doing it. The next one down says clear graphics content, and it'll rarely need to be checked, but you can leave it. All right. In fact, the author says you might as well uncheck it. When it's checked, iOS will draw the entire region covered by the object in transparent black, but because of performance, you typically will uncheck that. The clip subviews, which is the one right here. If the view contains subviews that are not completely contained within the bounds of its parent view, this checkbox determines how they will be drawn. All right, if it's checked, only portions that lie within the boundaries will be drawn, and if it's unchecked, subviews will be drawn completely if they lie outside. All right, it's unchecked by default, so we can turn it on if we really need it for some reason, but it's turned off again for performance reasons. The last one is auto resize subviews, which tells iOS to resize any subviews in the view if the view itself is resized. All right, we'll leave that checked. All right, after that comes stretching. And as mentioned, that's the next thing. This, it says the only stretching going on here is in the form of rectangular views being drawn as they're resized on the screen. The idea is that rather than the entire content of a view being stretched uniformly, if you want to, you can play with it. And they give you an example on the top of page 101 in the book. I'm not going to run through that with you, where you could only have certain portions stretched. Again, you would probably do something like that for effect. All right. So it says with the image view finished, it's time to bring on the text fields. It says grab a text field and drag it underneath the image view and make it flush with the right margin. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to put in a text view. I'm going to drag it up here. Oh, not a text view. I'm sorry, a text field. That was my error. Okay. Says use the blue guidelines to align it to the right margin and make it snug. Pretty close. I guess I could bring it down just a hair, but that's about right. It's about what it shows in the book on page 101. All right. You've already done this before, so that's no biggie. It says after you drop that, grab a label and drag it over so it's aligned with the left margin, but it's basically totally lined up with this. So again, I'll come over here to label. All right, grab my label, drag it over here. You can see now that they're even, and it's now, come on, there it is, flush. Okay. Again, it says on here on 102, we're going to align the label in the text field using the baseline, which is what I just did. In fact, I think they want it lined up with the baseline. They want it lined up pretty much in the middle. That's pretty good. That's figure 411. Now, pretty much right now, our screen looks like what you see on page 411 in the book. I'm sorry, figure 411 on page 102 in the book. It says double-click the label that you just entered and change its name to read name, colon, instead of label. Okay? And press enter to create, have it commit your changes, then drag another text field and place it below the first one, as shown in figure 412. So again, because I'm following what's in the book, I'm grabbing a text field, putting it under the previous text field. Looks pretty good. Again, it looks pretty much what you see in your book on figure 412 on page 103. It says once you've added a second text field, grab another label and place it just like we did. Place it under this one and line it up the same way. So double click it and change it to read. In this case, we want it to say, come on. The first one said label, and this one will say number. Okay. All right. It says single click the bottom text field and drag the left resize until it appears as close as it can get to the label. Okay, so right there. Again, this pretty much mirrors what you see in the book on page 104. Next, expand the top one the same way so it matches the bottom one in size. And the reason that we're going to end up doing it, and we're doing it this way, is we want both of them to line up with this. Okay? All right, it says we're basically finished with the text field except for one small detail. It says look back at figure 4.5. Do you see how name and number are right aligned? Right now ours are both left aligned, so I can click on here. I can hold down on shift and click the other one. I can go over here to my attributes inspector, and I can say that I want them right aligned. All right, so you'll notice that right now, again, it does not at all look perfect, but it's getting there. Okay. All right. So it says to align the right sides of the labels, click name, hold down on the shift, click number, so I did that. All right, I use the alignment control to make them right justified, and then make a constraint to make sure these two fields are always the same width. All right, by choosing editor, pin, widths equally, which is down, oops, not width, but widths equally down towards the bottom. All right, so you can see what has happened here. All right, it says when you've finished, it should look very similar to what you see in figure 4.5 in the book. The only difference is the light gray text in each text field. Okay, I don't have any light gray text in there, so that's what we have to add right now. All right, So it says to select the top one here, which we've done, and bring up again the attributes inspector, which is already up. The text field, it says, is among the most complex iOS controls and ones that are most commonly used. So when you look at the stuff in here, what you see in your attributes inspector right here is pretty much the same thing that you see in the textbook in figure 414. And they go through the text inspector settings. So I'm going to do that, and when I'm done, I'm going to stop the tape and then start it up for the next portion. So it says in the first section there, it says the text label points out controls that give you some control over the way the text appears in the field. All right, plain text. If you look here, we can have attributed text also, which we've talked a little bit about before, and we did programmatically in Chapter 3. We're going to leave it set to plain for now. All right. After that, as mentioned, it comes up with color, which is really broken down into two parts. You can either click here, and that'll bring up the color wheel, and there's other ways that you can do this also. All right. So there's other stuff that you can choose in here, as you notice. All right. So it says there's also the right size here, and that brings you some frequently or recently used colors and basically some system colors that are in there also. You can click other, and you can find other things that are in there as well. All right. So then there's the font section next. As mentioned, it's in three different parts. The first thing has got the type of font that you're using, and remember, if you click the T here, you can change it. Right now it's set to system, all right, but if you click down here, you can choose. If I change it from system to custom, I can set it to basically anything in this list that I want to set it to. All right, you'll notice how that changes when we do that. I'm going to just change it back. I think they want us to use system. Oops. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is right now. And next we have the size. Now they say that the default is 14. Mine looks 13, so I'm just going to up it by 1. So it now is 14. Okay. And it says below this are 5 buttons that we've got here. Well, we've also got here, we've got the 5 buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for left justify, center justify, right justify, fully justify, and as it says, I'm not sure what that last one is used for, so I'd be making up something. So they want us to come in here next into the placeholder and type into the placeholder, type in a name and hit enter. And that should then appear in here, although I'm not seeing it right now. All right, we should see it though when we run the program. The next two fields that are called background and disabled, they're used only if you're going to customize the appearance of your text field. We're not going to worry about them for right now. The next 4 are border style. We will talk about these in later lectures. They allow you to change the way the field's edge will be drawn, and that can be important because with some well, I'm going to do something I probably shouldn't do. I'm going to click on here, and you may or may not have noticed right now I can't change the width of the text field. What I'm showing you now is not in your book. But notice if I click here, now I can. See that? All right. Below that is a clear button, and that lets you choose when the clear button should appear. The clear button is the small X that can be in the right end of a text field. All right, they're typically not used in text fields, so we're just going to leave it as never appears. The checkbox next that says clear when editing specifies what happens when the user touches the field. If it's checked, any value that was previously in the field will be deleted, and the user starts then with an empty field. If it's unchecked, the previous value remains in the field. We'll leave it unchecked for now. All right. Next, we've got, as it says there, minimum font size, and that lets you set the minimum font size the text field will use for displaying its text. We'll leave it set for the default. That's fine. The adjust to fit text box specifies whether the size of the text should shrink if the text field is reduced in size. All right, it works in conjunction with a minimum font style setting, and specifying a minimum size allows you to make sure the text doesn't get too small so that, so it's always readable. Next, we've got a thing for capitalization, and it says let's change the capitalization pop-up to words. All right, so what that should do is it should take the text that's in there, that placeholder text that we put in there, that type in a name. All right, and it should make sure that the first word is going to be capitalized in there, even though we didn't put it in that way. The next four pop-ups that are in there: spell checking, correction, spell checking, keyboard, and appearance. For now, we'll just leave them all set to default. All right. Next, we've got the return key. I mean, if you want to know more about these, you can click the down arrow and find out, all right, the different things that are in there. Okay. Next is the return key pop-up. That's the key on the lower right-hand side of a virtual keyboard, and its label changes what you're doing. If you're entering text into a Safari search field, it says search. In an app like ours, done is going to be the right choice. It says make that change here. So for the return key, done. Okay. The auto enable return key, if it's checked, the return key is disabled until at least one character is typed into the field. We'll leave it unchecked. Next, they talk about the secure text box, which I don't see in here. Maybe I'm missing it. And sometimes with these, you literally have to drag down a little. There it is. So the secure checkbox specifies whether the characters being typed are displayed in the field, in the text field. You'd leave this, you would check this if the field was being used as a password field, for example. So they really wouldn't show, they'd show us something else. Oops, that was me, sorry. Come on. So I'm just going up a little bit here. All right, the next section, it says you'll probably have to scroll down to see, which I did, allows you to set control attributes inherited from UI control. These generally don't apply to text fields with the exception of the enable checkbox. They won't affect the field's appearance. We're just going to leave all the default settings in there under control. The last section is view that you see right here. All right, so there's the show for that. And I want to go to set it back to hide. All right, the last thing in there again is view. And as it says, it should look very familiar. It's identical to the section of the same name in the image view controller we looked at earlier. So we should check the opaque checkbox on here and uncheck the clear graphics content and uncheck the clip subviews for the same reasons we discussed earlier. In other words, for performance reasons. All right. Let's do the second text field, and then I'm going to stop the tape because it's getting way too long. Now you can see the type in a name is there. Okay? All right. So this one should say type in a number. I'm going to move that back up again. Oops, sorry. So we want placeholder text in there. And the first one was type in a name. And this second one, we want it to say type in a number. There's our name. And there's the number. All right. We want to go down to keypad in here also, or keyboard type, and we want to make sure that this is set to number pad because, again, that's what we want them to do, is type in a number. All right. As we did earlier, we will go down we will check the opaque checkbox and uncheck the clear graphics in this. So let me move that back up. All right. So again, as we said, check the opaque and uncheck the clears graphic and the clip subview. Okay, so we've done that. All right, next they want us to add constraints, but before we go in and start doing that, I'm going to stop because again, this is getting way too long.